This is Dr. Matthew Moore. I'm the principal of Pendleton High School. Hope everybody had a really restful and relaxing holiday break, and that you're as excited as we are to come back to school and start our second semester tomorrow. Before we do that, though, I wanted to take a few minutes to review some pretty significant changes or updates to our cell phone policy. Obviously, we've already gone through some of this. We started the school year with a pretty drastic change to how we use or do not use cell phones in classrooms. And if you'll recall, this started with the state passing a budget proviso attaching public education funds to schools having a policy restricting cell phone use. And if you'll recall, we started this and really restricted that to classrooms because we didn't have what is called a model policy from the state. And that has now been approved and adopted. And so we have the exact verbiage from the state about what our policy has to entail. And as I hinted throughout the semester last semester, it is significantly more restrictive. And so now we have to consider common areas, hallways, gymnasiums, cafeteria, et cetera, as well as the classroom instructional spaces. So the purpose of this talk is to sort of walk us through what we've already done, what we've been doing, and then this new addition, this new layer to addressing cell phone use on campus. So this is what it has looked like so far. Every student's desk on campus has a zipper pouch. And the expectation is that students, upon arrival to the classroom, put their phone in that pouch. If at any point they are found to be on their device during instructional time, in an instructional space, then that's a violation. And our violations escalate pretty quickly. So that first violation, the student's removed from class, spends the rest of the day in ISS. Second violation is the rest of that day in ISS plus another day of ISS. And by violation 3, they're going to get suspended. But we do reset those in-class violations at the end of each semester. This is largely unchanged, that we're going to continue doing what we're doing in classroom spaces. This is a place where there's been a pretty strong consensus from our teachers and our administration and parents about how this policy has really helped to limit distractions and disciplinary infractions and so on and so forth. None of this is changing. This was the battle that we, quite frankly, wanted to fight from the beginning. We have gotten a lot of reports from teachers about increased engagement, fewer distractions, fewer disciplinary incidents. Admin has reported a dramatic decrease in, I guess, what we would call interpersonal conflicts or drama, which really goes to show how much of those issues, especially some of our younger students, were starting through cell phone use in classrooms and then spilled over into other classes or the hallway. Obviously, students are still adjusting to it, but several have sort of admitted to us that even though they miss their phone and they wish they could still have their phone, they do admit that they're less distracted in class. So we have felt really, really good about the in-class approach that we've taken. But since the proviso was passed, and since the state model policy has been drafted and then approved and adopted, and since we know that our adoption and enforcement of this policy is tied to our funding from the state, we have to take the next step. So I just wanted to sort of walk us through what the state model policy is, and then how that's going to impact us on campus here at Pendleton High School. There's about to be a wall of text here, which I apologize for, but the details matter here. So first off, in terms of what the model policy tells us, during the school day, students are prohibited from accessing their personal electronic devices unless authorized for classroom use. I can go ahead and tell you at Pendleton High School there is no authorized classroom use for personal electronic devices. Students may not wear or access device accessories during the school day. We'll unpack what that means here in a second. Students must store their devices and device accessories in lockers, backpacks, or otherwise as directed by the school district during the school day. We're going to go through all the definitions the state provides for, what do they mean by access? What do they mean by accessories? The state really was extremely specific and prescriptive about what they meant with this policy. There's not much leeway or gray area here. And I want to bring your attention down to D. If a student violates the preceding rules during the school day, the student will be subject to progressive consequences in the Student Code of Conduct and disciplinary enforcement procedures. What that means is that this is a policy that the state does not just expect us to implement, but it's got to have teeth to it. The state is telling us we cannot have a policy that is a policy in name only. It's just words on paper. We say we're doing this and that these things aren't allowed, but we don't really enforce it. The state expects us to enforce this. They expect us to issue discipline when a student is not in compliance. Well, I'm not going to go through every single one of these right now, but I did want to show you just how detailed the state is in the model policy by defining all of these terms. So they define what they mean by a personal electronic device, by an accessory. What do they mean by the school day? What do they mean by access? What do you mean by accessing a device? And then they define what authorized for classroom use means. So we're going to unpack some of these definitions. This includes, but is not limited to, cell phones, smartwatches, tablets, and gaming devices. So smartwatches are officially included in these restrictions. They cannot be worn. Students are encouraged not to bring smartwatches or any of the other electronic device accessories to school. So, you're not allowed to use them. There's really not much point in bringing them. Obviously, students are going to need to bring their cell phones, but they've got to be powered off. We'll get to that here in just a second. But these accessories to cell phones, really, there is not very much point in bringing them at this point, with the model policy being what it is. This last bullet point, if I could just bring your attention to it, students may not access the Anderson 4 network via personal devices. So one of the ways that we anticipate some students trying to get around some of these policies is to bring a personal tablet or a personal device. And that doesn't fly either. So there's no avoiding the cell phone ban by bringing a tablet or bringing our personal laptop from home. Those cannot, by policy, be attached to our Anderson 4 network. School day is defined as the period of time that a student is present on the school campus from their arrival, i.e. tardy bell, until afternoon dismissal at the end of the instructional day. And so our interpretation of that is that because it references the tardy bell, we will begin enforcement of cell phones not being allowed in common areas at 8:30. So that is to say that when students enter the school building at 7:45 or 8 o'clock, we're not going to be enforcing the no cell phone rule in the mornings. All right. So that's the time to fire off the last text messages, to call mom and dad, to make sure your transportation is arranged, what have you. As soon as that tardy bell rings, those devices have to be powered off. They've got to be put inside the pouch, and they've got to be out of sight, out of mind. All right. There is no exception made at lunch. Again, the policy doesn't say that an exception can be made during lunch periods or during study halls or anything like that. It just says the entire instructional day. And so lunch falls within the instructional day. So phones will remain powered off and not accessed during lunch. Our interpretation of the school day as defined in this policy is that it ends at 3:30 when the dismissal bell rings. So at 3:30, dismissal bell rings. We're not going to have teachers making sure that students don't have their phones out as they walk to the bus ramp, or as they walk out front to be picked up, or as they walk to the student parking lot. Instructional day ends at 3:30. Access, again, very rigid definition here, is defined as viewing, holding, wearing, or otherwise using a device. So that is to say, if you look hard enough or breathe hard enough on a phone, the state says you're using it. Not much wiggle room at all. Which is why really that's one of the purposes of the pouches, is that it's a barrier for using it. There is no, I was just checking the time. I was just seeing what the weather was. I wasn't texting. I wasn't calling. None of that flies, because the word access as defined in the policy is incredibly restrictive. So again, what the state tells us to do is to have students power off their devices, not put it on silent, to power off their devices. Authorized for classroom use. This is not the loophole that some people think that it is. In order to get authorized for classroom use, and by I mean a cell phone, it's got to meet some incredibly rigid criteria. First off, it has to include alignment with a standards-aligned educational objective that cannot be reasonably achieved using district-owned devices. So, in the old days, a teacher could say, well, I want to let my students listen to, music on their phones. It helps them work. Well, whether or not I personally agree with that, the state does not deem that as an appropriate authorization for classroom use. That is not standards aligned. That can easily be replicated using other resources. So it's a really, really tough bar to clear to get authorized for classroom use, and it has to be improved all the way up to the level of the superintendent. At Pendleton High School, there is going to be no authorized classroom use of cell phones. What it looks like here at PHS, this is a slight change. What we did last semester is that the zipper pouches were pretty much anchored to classrooms. And so a student would enter the classroom, they'd put their cell phone in the pouch, and then they'd hang the pouch from the desk. And then at dismissal, at the dismissal bell, they would take their cell phone out and then repeat that process every period. Well, because the state policy really demands that those devices be turned off and then kept off and then not accessed, which is to say not even held or looked at during the instructional day. We have to have a way to have those pouches stay with the student, and those cell phones stay in those pouches for the entire instructional day. As a consequence of that, those pouches now belong to the student. So instead of constantly taking my cell phone in and out of pouches with every class, I'm going to have my cell phone pouch after the first day of school, and it's mine now. And I am going to put my cell phone powered off into that pouch, and that pouch is going to follow me for the rest of the day. It's now mine. Devices must be powered off and secured in the pouch by 8:30. We are still going to require that pouches are hung from desks. This is because it allows us to do a visual spot check for compliance. We know that we could just tell students that they've got to power it off and put it in their book bag. But then, students are savvy. They hide things in their jeans pockets and their hoodie and their sleeve. And we're not naive. We know that some of that still goes on. But at least with the pouches being hung from desks, we have some way of checking to see what percentage of our students are in compliance. Students who need to call a parent or receive a call from a parent may ask the teacher to go to the front office to do so. In the past, or last semester, what happened is if a student had an emergency and they needed to use their cell phone, we would get administrative approval, and the administrator would take them to place where they could have privacy and discretion and they could make that phone call. The state model policy makes no such allowance. It says that they are powered off and inaccessible for the entire school day. Additional materials from the state of South Carolina has sort of reinforced this and driven the point home. The state of South Carolina wants cell phone use on public school campuses to be essentially none. So if we need to call home or arrange transportation, call a ride, we're going to have to use a district or a school phone. We'll get into that a little bit more in just a second. To try to accommodate some of these requests, because we don't want to have students swarming the front office. If it is a call that doesn't require privacy or discretion, I just need to know if grandma's going to pick me up after school, for instance, then the student can ask to use the teacher's classroom phone. And if the teacher is okay with that, they can use the teacher's classroom phone. We want to encourage parents to utilize email to communicate with students if it's necessary during the school day. I've got a 17-year-old son. He does not have a cell phone. I email with him back and forth a couple times a day. That's how we update each other on transportation or if track practice got canceled or postponed. I really want to encourage everyone to use email because in the age of one-on-one devices, students pretty regularly check their emails. I wanted to address this because this is, as a parent, probably the place where we get the most pushback, and is a very valid concern and understandable. Families, parents want to know that they can quickly contact their students if there is some kind of an emergency. So we've got an intruder in the building, for instance. It is very human. It is very intuitive. It's instinctual that I want to get a hold of my child. I'm going to read through some bullet points that I think are valid, but I'm going to circle back to sort of tell you what would actually happen with cell phones if we had a true emergency on campus. But these are good points that are worth considering. Cell phones and social media can, and they are often used to spread threats and to coordinate acts of violence. So whereas we might be thinking about cell phone access as being necessary to somehow prevent or address violence, they are just as easily used to spread or coordinate acts of violence. Use of cell phones by students can accelerate the spread of misinformation, rumors, and fear. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that this is absolutely the truth. The degree, the speed at which misinformation spreads via text and social media on a public school campus is unbelievable. And I don't even think it's necessarily, bad intent, people trying to drum stuff up. People believe, by and large, what they hear. And it's sort of like the old game of telephone. By the time that piece of information or really misinformation has been spread a certain number of times, it's perceived as being true, whether it is or not. And so if you think about a situation where we actually have an intruder on campus, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to come up with a scenario where, as scary as the intruder in the building is, where the narrative gets completely pushed beyond what is true and actually makes matters worse. In an emergency lockdown situation where we actually have shut and locked doors and we've covered up windows and we've turned off lights and we've gone to a hardened, secure, quiet corner of the classroom, cell phones can ring, they can vibrate. If you're trying to talk to someone, you can give away you and your classmates' location. And it also makes you less focused on the instructions that you will be getting from adults. So, in the case of an actual lockdown, we will have personnel in a safe room, monitoring the intruder on cameras, and using the intercom to let people know where the intruder is and when and where we can have certain classrooms evacuate. And if we're not paying focused attention and listening to those instructions, then that makes us less safe and not more. Cell phones can lead to families arriving at the school and making it more difficult for first responders to facilitate a safe evacuation. And again, this is a really understandable human thing, but it is absolutely a risk if we have 900 students who are all texting and calling parents that something's going on campus and they don't even actually know all the details yet. It will really dampen first responders' ability to get accurate information and to respond without any kind of hindrance, because we'll have a mass of families who understandably want to come get their child. Also, to that same point, cell phones can delay or hinder timely and efficient family-student reunification. So, in a crisis management plan, if we have an emergency on campus that requires evacuation of the building, we're not reuniting families on campus because the entire reason we evacuated the campus is that it is no longer safe. So if we have a mass of parents all arrive at the same time, they not only potentially hinder first responders from accessing parts of the building they need to, but they can hinder our ability to get to our safe reunification zone and then get you back with your child. So all that to say that it does bear repeating that we need to at least consider the negative ramifications of constant access to our child with cell phones. There is such thing as too much connection. All that being said, I needed you to hear from me that if there was ever a true blue emergency on our campus, you have my assurance, you have my word that our teachers are going to be far more concerned with keeping our students safe, with making sure they are listening to instructions, that they're checking their radios, that they are doing whatever they can to keep themselves and their students safe, and not worrying about cell phone policy. No one is getting in trouble for a cell phone violation if we have, for instance, an intruder in the building. And obviously, our school and our district would go to great pains and be extremely diligent to get you as families the most accurate information as soon as humanly possible. And we go to great lengths to make sure that that happens. So our approach at Pendleton High School. First, we have to be in compliance with the state policy. We can't just ignore it. We have to issue consequences. There is no verbiage in the proviso or the state model policy that requires us to issue the same consequence for common area offenses as classroom offenses. We want to differentiate between these two spaces. So what I mean by that is, just being fully transparent, I think that it is more important to police cell phone use in classrooms because that's where the learning happens. If I've got to die on a hill, so to speak, I want it to be the hill of classroom and instructions. So that's why we will not be changing any of our approach to classroom discipline for classroom cell phone violations. But the reality is that if we were to have that same rigid approach with common area violations, it's going to lead to a million negative interactions with students. We're going to have a mountain of discipline that is not necessarily needed and doesn't really get us any kind of payoff other than getting a lot of students in ISS. And that's just not really the culture that we want at Pendleton High School. So here is, just so you know, this is not our approach. I wanted to show you what other districts in our area are doing. So this is a high school in Anderson County, which I won't name, that this is their personal electronic device consequence matrix. So first offense, 1 day of ISS, second offense, 2 days of ISS, third offense, 1 day of out of school suspension, I'm going to stop there to be polite, but I want you to notice how quickly this escalates. By the sixth offense, that student has to meet with district personnel. They have now been suspended out of school 14 days. And this policy makes no distinction between in-class violations and hallway violations. So under this approach, a student could get 14 days of out-of-school suspension for having their cell phone out 6 times at lunch. We just didn't like that approach for us. So this is what we're doing. Nothing changes with classroom violations. That stays the same. But what we're going to do with common area violations is use a sort of demerit system. So violations 1 through 4, you're going to be given a verbal warning. So a faculty member will say, hey, John Smith, that's a cell phone violation, put it up. All right. Only at violation number 5 will you get a 1 hour after school detention. There's a form which teachers are going to use to document when they issued the warning. We're only going to issue consequences for every 5th common area violation. Again, violations 6 through 9, verbal warnings. Again, you will know when you've been given warning because the teacher will say, John Smith, that's a cell phone violation, put it up. And provided that you go ahead and put your cell phone up for most of the violations, that's going to be the consequence, is you got called down for it and it was reported. It escalates on violation number 10 to a 2.5 hour after school detention. Violations 11 through 14, again, we go back to verbal warnings. And then violation 15 is 1 day of ISS. After the 15th violation, again, is every 5th violation, and we do not escalate past a day of ISS. This is a system, a progression that we feel is more fair, that appropriately incentivizes and prioritizes classroom instruction. And provided that students are respectful when they're told to put their phone up, then we think that this will allow us to be in compliance with the state model policy, but also sort of try to protect our hallway classroom culture. There are trade-offs here. So when a teacher tells a student that they're in violation of the cell phone policy and that they need to put up their device, the student needs to comply. So we're trying to be as flexible as we can be and still be in compliance with the state. But the minute that a student gets an attitude, tells them no, they're not going to, or they just ignore the faculty member in the hallway and they just keep on walking, well, now that's not a cell phone violation. That's disrespect and refusal to obey, and the student will be disciplined as such. I just need to encourage students, if you get called down for having your cell phone out in the hallway, just put it up. Just put it up. Unless it's a 5th or 10th or 15th violation, that interaction you just had was your consequence. Students should assume that if they've been called down for a violation in the hallway, that the teacher reported it. Again, teachers have a Google form that they'll use to report these things. Because of the sheer volume, the number of violations that are going to happen in common areas, students aren't going to be called in for like a hard copy, paper copy referral. All right. They'll know when they've got a consequence when they get called in for that 5th violation. All right. And that's the trade-off. If we want to use a demerit system and issue consequences sparingly for common area violations, then there's just no way to be able to document every single interaction with a paper referral. What will happen is that when a student is called in for the 5th or 10th or 15th violation, they will be shown the dates of the violations. So I'll show you an example here in just a second. They'll know who reported them. They'll know what the date was. They'll know the hallway that it happened in. All right. So here's that example. So John Doe is my student, and you see that when I get called in as John Doe for my 1 hour after school detention for common area violations, I can see that I was called down by Mr. Boyd Dr. Boyd and Dr. Sindwell and Dr. Moore and Ms. Webb and Ms. Watts, and I see where it happened and the dates it happened. And so you will eventually know exactly what the dates of your violations were, but they'll come in batches. All right. So we feel like this approach is the best we can find to stay in compliance with the state, and still try to protect our classroom culture and not over police hallways. This is going to be a period of adjustment. I felt like our students did a tremendous job adjusting to what was a significant departure from normal with the new cell phone policy at the start of the school year. In terms of classroom approach, there are not many changes. We're going to do what works, what has been working. The only thing that has changed really is that the pouch now follows the student throughout the school day. And that students still need to hang the pouch from the desk when they get into the classroom. There should be no taking cell phones inside of pouches, outside of pouches. They should be powered off the entire school day. I know that there are going to be a lot of questions. We feel confident that we've got most of these ironed out, but first attempts tend to be your worst ones, and this is our first attempt at ever trying to police cell phones in hallways at Pendleton High School. So we're going to learn as we go. If you have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me or anybody on my administrative team. Our goal is to create an educational environment for our students that is in compliance with the state, allows them to learn, minimizes distraction, but also protects the dignity and the integrity of our kids. So I'm sorry this went a little bit long. We will be communicating with students directly via email, ThrillShare, and through class meetings, as well as social media posts. So there will be plenty more to come on this. The first week back, Tuesday through Friday of this week, is a grace period, which is to say we will still call students out for cell phone violations in hallways, but we won't start documenting those violations. And we will go over all those details with the kids tomorrow. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. I'm excited about this semester. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you've got any kind of questions.